Okay, hello, and welcome to the Humanities Forum. Thank you all for coming today. I wanted to start with a quick logistical introduction. So I'll be introducing André Robert Lee, and then he'll be speaking briefly to introduce his film. We'll watch the film, it's a little over an hour, and then we'll have a discussion. Following the discussion, there'll be hors d'oeuvres and refreshments outside, and we can continue our conversation there. Okay, so I am so honored and excited to have the opportunity to introduce André Robert Lee for the Humanities Forum today, and we as a campus are honored to have him as our guest. His presence here could not be more timely or appropriate. Before I came here this afternoon, I was sitting at a field hockey game, and the students next to me began talking about the incident on our campus yesterday. One of the students was a student of color, and in the course of the conversation, one of the other students turned to her and said, "How are you feeling? How is this affecting you?" And she responded and said, "I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted right now, and it's hard to be here right now." And actually, I invited them to come here at 3 o'clock. I don't know if they showed up or not. And I was simultaneously happy to hear them having such an open and honest conversation about race and this campus, but also to hear that from her mouth was difficult. And I know that it is truth, and that is perhaps what makes it quite difficult to hear. We are, as a campus, confronting the racism in our midst. And this film and our discussion today should intensify the process of an action plan to create a community where racism and hatred has no home. André Robert Lee's intensely personal work might help us understand our own histories and place our own experiences in larger contexts and begin the work of truly empathizing with experiences that differ from ours. If white students, faculty, and staff, or as James Baldwin might phrase it, those who believe themselves to be white, can understand the pain and history of racism in our country, can they then act in ways that cause pain and suffering? I have to hope that they cannot. André Robert Lee's life's work has focused on telling a story that shakes up and challenges received wisdom about privilege and the construction of community. Here today, in a predominantly white institution such as ours, he poses the question of how we may begin to act in a way that creates the conditions for a beloved community, that acknowledges the pain of racism and recognizes the need for restitution and reparation before the dream of reconciliation can become a reality. I first encountered the film Prep School Negro while watching PBS one evening and was immediately drawn into the film. I encouraged everyone I knew to watch the film, and I hope after today's forum, you all will do the same. I will not talk too much now about Mr. Lee's personal biography, as that will become quite clear to you in the film you're about to watch. I will, however, give you an overview of his work as a distinguished filmmaker, educator, and author. He began his career in New York City public secondary schools, teaching documentary filmmaking and literature, and after working at the Ford Foundation, began to make documentary films himself. He worked for Miramax Films and joined Urban World Films, where he was the director of marketing, and then moved to another production company, Film Movement, where he began producing his own films. The Prep School Negro was his first feature-length documentary and was aired on PBS in 2014. He has visited 350 high schools, colleges, universities, and conferences to workshop the film since its release, continuing his work as an educator. The tremendous success of the film has led to the development and distribution of more documentary films. Recently, Mr. Lee has produced and directed a 12-month series for Race Forward and Color Lines entitled Life Cycles of Inequity, focusing on the systemic inequalities encountered by African American males from conception through death. He also produced the film I'm Not Racist, Am I? In 2014, which documents the experience of New York teenagers of all ethnic and racial backgrounds, engaging in difficult conversations about race and its impact on their lives. Like the Prep School Negro, this film has been workshopped widely in secondary and post-secondary institutions, gatherings, conferences, and law firms. André Robert Lee is also currently working on a feature film project focused on the life of Bayard Rustin, who I learned about only a few years ago through a student research project on lesser-known civil rights figures. So I'm quite excited for the release of that film. Mr. Lee is currently developing a network documentary series. In 2017, he partnered with Spike TV to create The Election Effect, which I believe will be premiering quite soon. He's also created a documentary about incarcerated youth engaged in an arts program in Richmond, Virginia. He continues to teach high school students Introduction to Filmmaking at the Germantown Friends School, his alma mater. He has received awards from Connecticut College and served on numerous film juries, including the Oscar Student Competition and various film festivals. He's currently working on a memoir, as well as a collection of essays about connections he made while filming the Prep School Negro. He's also started a clothing line called Government Cheese that attracted my attention. It's named after his grandmother, who distributed government cheese in her neighborhood. So keep an eye out for that. He has touched many lives, especially those of American youth. And I am so glad we have the opportunity today to share in his wisdom. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you so much. That's pretty great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that hearty response. I'm really excited to share this film with you. This is a documentary that I created a number of years ago. It's called the Prep School Negro, and it's my story about going to a private high school and a scholarship in Philadelphia. You'll learn a lot more as you watch. I want to say this. I learned about the incident that happened here on campus. For my company I work with is called Point Made Learning, and we actually created a video that deals with this called I Wish I Were Black. And it's all about the experience of folks adapting various pieces of adopting some of the costumes that are problematic. And with the video, we ask people to actually go to the other level of the conversation. It's not enough just to say you can't do that. It's more about why are we talking about this conversation? Why are we having this discussion? And it's an extraction from the film, I'm Not Racist, Am I? So we'll share that with your faculty and staff here, and they'll feel free to pass it around. It's a video we created that's for sale, but we made it free just yesterday because we said Halloween is coming, so let's get in front of it. So here we are. So we'll share that with you all, which I hope will be a tool to help you think about why we have this conversation. So the film itself is a project that I made a number of years ago. I'm still shocked and surprised that I'm still on the road with it, and I appreciate you all having me here to have this conversation. I'm going to ask you to do a few things as you watch. The first thing is to think about, as you watch, think about where your heart and your mind, your heart and your mind meet. Where the two come together. Where does the emotional self find the intellectual self? You know, I think that's very important, this experience. And also look for yourself in the film. It's called the Prep School Negro, but I think the reason why I'm still invited to come show it and have conversations is that people actually are surprised at how much they actually relate to the story. And I'll give you all 3 questions to consider also while you watch it. The first question to think about is, what did you first think of when you heard the title? When you first heard the title, The Prep School Negro, what's the first thing that ran through your mind? Do a little compare and contrast exercise after you watch it. How do you feel about that first thought you had? So once again, that question is, what did you first think about when you first heard the title? The second question or idea to think about is, what film do you imagine you're going to see today? It's called The Prep School Negro. The film became very different than what I intended it to be. So what film do you imagine you'll see today? And the final question, I get to live and work as an artist and travel around the country and do this. I love to hear people's thoughts and ideas. And so think of one word that comes to mind as you watch the film that may reflect how you're feeling after watching it. Those questions one more time. What were your thoughts and reaction to the title before and after? What film do you imagine you'll see versus what you did see? And then finally, what's a Gesundheit? One word that comes to mind as you watch it. And once again, I'll say, think about where your heart and your mind meet. Where do they come together in that space? And finally, a little technical note. What I'll do is I'll let the film actually play until the credits roll. There's an image that pops up at the end of the credits that's relevant for the film, but then I'll come right back up and we'll have time for some conversation and answer some questions so we can get to the refreshments and snacks and all that stuff. So once again, thank you all so much for having me. It just so happens it's like the most beautiful day in the world outside, so I appreciate you coming inside to spend about a couple of minutes or an hour plus with me to watch this film and have a conversation. So once again, thank you, and I will see you after. So after every, could we get the lights? Oh, you got them. So after every screening, I like to have it play until that last clip shows, because you see my mother for who she really was. You know, in the film, you see her in her last hours and days, and I like that last clip because she was the kind of person, whenever a camera came around, she would say, "Get the camera on her face," and then she would pose. So I like to have that shot. I want to start with a little story. I have a friend from high school that I'm still close with. We were actually texting in the back, and he at my school was a Quaker, really liberal, lefty place, and he was the one Republican at the school. And he would tease me and say, "Andre, I'm actually the real minority here because I'm a Republican," and we laugh about that. We're still friends to this day, and he has 3 little boys, and one of the kids is about, at the time was about 6, and I was at the house, and I pulled out my iPhone, and it was a shot of a little kid on there, and he goes, "Oh, is this you when you were little?" I said, No, this is my godson. For the story, it's important to know the family's Jewish. And the little kid looked at it and said, "Well, what's a godson?" I said, if something happens to the kid, I will step in and take care of him, make sure he's clothed properly, make sure he's loved, and make sure he has support and a place that he can call his own if something happens to the parents. And they were like, okay. He was kind of silent. So we're sitting at the table about 20 minutes later, eating dinner, and that kid looks up and goes, "Oh, so you're like serious black." And somebody gets it, yeah, right? And we were sitting, and the mother kind of grabs the table and looks at me, and the father looks over, and we're freaking out, and we realize he's talking about Harry Potter novels. And in Harry Potter, his godfather is named Sirius Black. So this little 6-year-old was mixing it up. And I tell that story because oftentimes that friend and I, we don't see eye to eye all the time, and we've had lots of intense debates. But what we do is we do sit down together and actually have those conversations and lean into it. And I've tried to bring him to my side. I should have bring him to his side. But at the end of the day, a lot of our conversations start with, "I love you, man, but," and we go forward. So I really think it's important to have that conversation. And so with that, now's the time. If anybody wants to ask a question, we can do that right now and have some time to do a little feedback and conversation and thoughts and responses from you all. Yes? Oh, you need the mic because the camera has to hear. Thank you.
Hello. I enjoyed your film. How many years of filming is this over?
Yeah, this was filmed over about 2 years. About 2 years that we did a year of editing. Really, when I started, I thought that it would be all kids' proms and graduations and that, and then my mother became ill. The moment fell into place for the production. I was actually in the hospital negotiating with lawyers on this phone and doctors in person, and it was a really intense moment. So it took about 2 years to make it. And actually, I'm glad you asked that, because this is the second version of the film. I have one version I did that's 53 minutes long, and I made that and had out there and thought it was done. But I got a call from some folks at the Academy Awards who said, "Hey, would you consider working with us to expand the film?" And I said, "Let me think about it, yes." And so I spent another year working with them to expand it and make this longer version, which is the one that aired on PBS and that I now travel with. Thanks. Yes.
Is your father still living?
No, my father is not still alive. He died about 4 years ago.
So in the film, you mentioned that while you were recording, you were going through your own personal struggles. So I was wondering how it felt for you and how it still feels now watching yourself as you grow throughout the film and as you continue to grow.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, and actually connects to the father moment. I want to say more about that also. This is the first time in a while that I sat in the back and watched. I still, when it comes to the hospital scene, I still leave because it's just too much to experience that again. That scene with my father, I'm so glad that sign from his door is on there, because that's just who he was. And we never got to toss the ball in the front yard, but that connection in that moment was so intense and life-changing that I got more than I ever expected. I never thought I'd get to tell him I love him or hear him say he loved me. I just never imagined that would happen. And here I am with a camera crew in his house, and it finally happens. And that was revolutionary. I often like to say that making this film and this experience has saved my life, because it really was an intense cathartic experience, and I dealt with more than I think I even knew I was dealing with. So it's intensely powerful. When I first made the film, I thought, who wants to see me whining, complaining about my privilege of this luxury of education that I have for 53 minutes or 71 minutes long? And something happened where I was at a school towards the beginning of this experience of taking it around a couple years ago, and we showed it at a school called the Head Roy School, and it's a school in Oakland, California, this really intense boarding school, or private school rather, in the hills of Oakland. And we showed it, and I was wondering what was going to happen. This is maybe the fifth or sixth time I showed it to a new audience. And afterwards, this 65-year-old white woman fell in my arms weeping, and I was like, there, because I was kind of like, what did the Prep School Negro mean to you? What was so great, and this is something I believe in, we have to find ways to verbalize that internal dialogue. So often we keep stuff inside and think, well, no one understands it, my own personal experience. But you'll be really surprised at how much of a connection you can actually have when you feel comfortable speaking about your actual experience and sharing. So it's been tremendous growth. I'm a filmmaker. I never intended to be on the road touring, but here I am many years later still having folks actually interested in sitting through the film and engaging in conversation and dialogue. So it's been incredible. I'll finish up with saying this, Toni Morrison, Faulkner, even Walt Whitman, they all said this, write what you know. When you create and tell stories about your own experience, it often has a chance to be a deeper and richer experience, and that's what I really tried to do in this film. So thank you for those questions. I'll let Oprah figure out where to go next.
Hi, my name is Sayo. I'm so happy you came. I'm like a huge fan. So W.E. Du Bois has this concept of double conscience in which African Americans are always struggling through being Black in the Black community and being a Black in the white community. Do you think in the 21st century, is it possible for African Americans to really overcome that? Like, what steps do we need to do to achieve that? I don't know if you could answer that question.
Yeah, that's a big one. Thank you for Providence College staff and faculty making great thinkers. In terms of overcoming that, because the way you pose it is, what can we do, as I imagine we as African Americans do, to overcome that? I actually think it's not us that need to do anything to overcome that. I think it's a society that we exist in that creates that space where we need a dual consciousness. You should talk to, there are a few people, actually there's a number of faculty and staff and retired people here who are actually meeting right now, who've been reading that exact book and a couple others and having great conversations, which I think some students' involvement in that will be really wonderful. But I think in preparing for my visit here, I revisited the text and looked at that notion of dual consciousness. And I think sometimes we present it and we're missing the deeper explanation that he actually meant. Because when he talked about it, he said, on the one hand, African Americans, we exist. We have a world, we function in it, we function high in it, it's our world, it's our universe, and it's separate because, Gesundheit, there is a white world that doesn't allow us to exist at that full level. So what has to happen is that world that's excluding us and keeping us from participating just has to open their eyes and look and see. So I think we have lots of examples of it, and like, I'll go on the entertainment level right now, the fact that something like Blackish, the TV show, is a nationally recognized piece. There's not enough, in my opinion. There are little dabs and pieces that are happening. So my thought is, the way I've always seen it as a strength and a power that we actually have existing in that dual consciousness. It's when you work a muscle, it becomes stronger. And that ability to exist in those different realms is really great and wonderful. My thought is, how can we get the community that is by design and by definition, I don't mean individual people, I mean the system that is in place to exclude full participation. How can we get that to crack and open up and say, let's look at these people and meet them at a whole level? So often people look at folks and go, I can't relate to that person at all. They're so different from me. They look different, they sound different, they have different food. And I always push back on that one and say, slow it down. The example I think about, I go to lots of high schools and all kinds of schools and show this film, and I've had a lot of people say, well, talking about having kids of color in school and wanting to connect with the parents. And their thought is, it's hard, we don't have anything in common with those people, they're so different. And I'm like, you actually have a really tangible thing in common. You have the child. Like, come together around that. Forget about your taste in food and music and et cetera, and think about the whole experience of the child in this community. So we often find times, and I'm not saying that, I think both sides have some responsibility in that, but I do think in terms of this concept that W. Du Bois was discussing here in our United States society, in terms of one group being excluded from the other, the responsibility laid more heavily on the other to look and say, I need to recognize you as a full human being and not 3/5 of a person, et cetera. That was something that was instilled in us and designed by law. So that's my very long answer to say that I think that and this is something else, it's one of the teachers you saw in there that helped us think about this. I thought was so strong. We read in 9th grade, we were reading Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, and at the same time, we read Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Are Watching God. And we had a whole discussion about portmanteau, which is the creation of words and what that meant. And the idea was, understand the strength of these two people who were very different, who were creating words. One was ignored for a long time until Miss Alice Walker found and resurrected her work and brought Zora Neale Hurston back to us. But for me, what I got out of that in that room was the teacher saying to me, without pointing to me and saying it, she put it in front of me and helped me figure out and discover that actually I have an extra skill set by being able to exist in both worlds, and that's a strength. I do think the mission really lies in the group that's historically excluded us from full participation of turning things around and recognizing. Thank you for that.
Those questions you asked us in the beginning, I could think of two of them. I'm not sure the second one. The first one, I expected a movie more about the troubles of being black at an all-white school with different class and everything. Instead, I got a life story. And I think one word I would say was it was very sincere. I don't remember the second question you asked. But it was a different experience. I had expected more of a concentration on the prep school, but I think it's a very good movie.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Yes, thank you for this. I did teach at a very prestigious boarding and day school in the 60s, Cranbrook Schools in Michigan, for many years. And I was particularly struck by the young woman in tears who didn't come from the ghetto and really was almost more estranged. Most of the students I remember at Cranbrook, both in the boys and the girls schools, who were black, obviously came from the upper and middle classes. Mm-hmm. So in the 60s, this was still not happening. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if that dynamic continues on, because she was in the gang and was out of the gang that really was her heritage.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. That's Bree who cries, and something I almost always forget to do. I promise Bree that I'll tell people that Bree's okay. You know, she watched that scene and we were really nervous because she's so vulnerable and exposed. And I sat down with her and said, well, what do you think? And she looked and she was quiet and she goes, I have a pimple in the shot. Can you get that out? And I was like, you are a 16-year-old girl. Awesome. Bree is, when I first sat down, I was nervous when I sat down with her because I was thinking, I'm making a film about lower income students of color. How does this relate to you? Will you be interested at all? Let's chat. And as soon as we sat down, she just started talking and talking and talking, and it was really intense. There's a phrase that we developed that goes along with the project. We call it psychological homelessness. You know, the sense of like, where is my home and where do I fit in, which touches back on the dual consciousness idea. And what Bree was talking about was the fact that everything should be okay. She's upper income, and she's really upper income. We had a shot of her house, and my editor thought it was a school. And I said, no, that's Bree's house. And her parents both were lower income people that became very successful and worked hard and achieved it. So what they did was she was thrown in this environment, and I think they thought, well, we have everything, so everything's fine. But she was missing some sort of connection. And she didn't want to complain to her parents because they were making a sacrifice to send her to the school. And she would go to school and not really connect with some of the kids. So she was in this space of just sitting alone. And I asked her, I said, what do you do? She said, I just kind of sit in my room and I cry. And I said, well, that ends today because your story is just as valid and important as mine. So it goes back to this notion of how we sometimes don't welcome in people who appear different from us. And it can be on a really superficial level. It's learned behavior that I think that we have inside of us. It's one we have to fight to deconstruct and take apart. It's one I commit to on a daily basis with my art and work and try and change and turn around. Bree really is doing well. She's out of college, and she now lives in Seattle, Washington. She's in the STEM world. I think I just saw she just came back from doing something in Kuwait. She's just intense and doing so well. And I like to share her story, and I'm glad she's in it because oftentimes people walk in and think, well, this is going to be hard for the lower income students, as was mentioned earlier. But what we see is this is something that many people on different lines see. Something else that I've noticed, I was at the North Mount Herman School, and I showed the film, and this 7-year-old kid stood up, and he was a white kid. He said, hey, I want to apologize because I really relate to the movie. And he sat back down, And I talked to him afterwards, and his parent was a teacher at the school. And so he understood the story from a class issue because he was like, I look like these kids, but I'm not on the same exact financial status of them. So this question was actually raised in a discussion earlier, like how much does class and race come into the conversation? And I also think class is a harder thing to discuss in our American society than compared to race sometimes. So I'm glad you picked up on Bree, and she's doing very well, and it was really powerful to have her in the film and see her really transition and turn around.
I enjoyed the film. What struck me, though, was it was remarkably little about race, or even about class. It was partly about that. But it was mainly about someone coming from a rather difficult family background, moving into an alien environment with strange customs and growing away from his family. And this is something people of every color experience. Even double consciousness. It may be, and I don't know, I'm not one, that some rich white Episcopalians feel really at home in American society. I doubt it. I doubt it. But not being Episcopalian or rich, I really don't know for sure. But everyone, lots and lots and lots of people feel in one way or other homeless in American society. I guess that it's the majority, and I guess it's a substantial majority. Maybe it's even universal.
Yeah, I think this is partially why the film still has some relevance, because it is a human tale and people connect with it. I was telling my story in terms of it being about race and about class, because those are the big issues for me. And I think you tap into a moment that's real. I had a connection with a friend who went to my high school, and he saw the film. And he reached out to me, and this is someone I didn't connect with much. And he came to our school in 10th grade, and he came from an Episcopalian school called the Episcopal Academy. Doesn't get more Episcopalian than that. And he saw the film, and he was like, whoa, André, I connected in so many ways. And I was like, you did? Tell me about that. When he came to our high school, his father had just died, and he just inherited a multi-million-dollar company. And he had a really difficult family. He had a very estranged brother, and it was weird that the stuff went to him at 16 versus his older brother, and all this stuff. And I'm kind of sitting listening like, get to the problem, But what he talked about was the notion of when he came to the school, it was just a new and different place. And if we don't find a way to welcome someone into a space and offer love and support and open encouragement and allow for each story to be verbalized and us to communicate with it, we miss the chance for the growth and development. And that's what I got out of the conversation with him, of him saying, okay, this is how I connected. And it was powerful. Imagine if in 10th grade, he and I had a conversation about what it was like. But we were just totally separate. He had like one of the biggest Audis I've ever seen in my life, and I didn't have a car at all. And there were just not many ways that we thought we could connect. And here we are many years later with this deeper connection than we actually imagined. So that point you make, which I think is why people actually relate to and enjoy the story. When I made it, I didn't have that in mind. I was just an artist trying to create, trying to have a cathartic experience and make this movie. So it's been powerful to see that the film exists and connects folks on a human level. So thanks for that. I think there was a couple over there. Oh. It's my friend from the South.
Yes, so I guess my question will relate to that. So I am from the South. I was thinking about things I related to in the film, and the first thing that really jumped out at me, there were several, but the one that really hit me was when you talked about being made fun of for saying can I ask you a question, and that wasn't my particular dialect, but I had cousins who were from elsewhere and terribly mercilessly teased for my very rural Southern accent, and. But so I guess what I'm thinking about, it relates to the earlier question, is how do we strike a balance, I guess, both as you as someone sort of starting this conversation and me as someone, sort of trying to learn from it. Like, I feel like there's, right, one danger is sort of looking and seeing the differences and saying, oh, this is, right, isn't, right, and I think sometimes we sort of get this from some of the older teachers talking about, when you were first admitted to the school, and it's sort of, isn't this a great story about this opportunity you had, someone from your background, right? And if we see that, then we don't see the commonality, and I think we're sort of spectators and we can't learn anything from it. But if we go the opposite direction, I can talk about, these are the elements of alienation I recognize, these are the ways in which my academic life is very different from a lot of people in my family, but then I can miss the fact that a lot of the foreign environments I blundered my way into throughout my life, I was able to be oblivious about the fact that I didn't belong there and only realize it after the fact. Whereas, I think if I had not had the racial privilege of, being white in America, I think there are a lot of those doors that wouldn't have been open, or at least it would have been much more conspicuous as I was blundering through them. So I don't know if you have any general advice, either for presenters or for students or audience members, of how to strike that balance between seeing only the differences and not learning anything versus seeing only the commonalities and so then being unable to learn anything.
I actually think you answered your question as you were asking and explaining what the question was, in terms of when you interact and meet someone new, here we are, who are you? We're starting from there. And we all walk in a room and do preconceived, we do have preconceived notions and make judgments. What I try and do is I try and forgive myself and then move forward and actually have a real conversation and try not to let those judgments carry weight, And so if I have to give any advice or potential direction for facilitators, presenters, teachers, human beings, it is, approach someone and assume good intent. Allow for, I said this earlier, even more better than assuming good intent, allow for, one thing I do is I say, allow for first draft. So when you're talking to somebody and they say stuff that may seem messy or crazy, as opposed to saying, okay, you fail because you messed up what you're saying, take a breath and say, okay, that hit me some kind of way. Let's discuss that and how can we move forward? Because when you just say, well, forget about it and walk away, nothing happens, What I've seen in these experiences, I was actually, I guess, a little further north from here at a school called Baylor University. Is it Baylor College or Baylor University? Baylor University. And had an intense experience after a screening there, Folks were really resistant and pushed back, this is accusing us and all this stuff. And it was great. I love it when people push back and challenge me and say, no, this is wrong. I don't agree with anything you're saying. I'm like, awesome, tell me more. That's how I go about it. Not everybody can do that. I have a lot of patience. My team teases me and says I'm the white whisperer because I get people to open up and have the conversation. But I think that if you really can find a way to just really get someone into a conversation and accept that not everyone is going to be able to do that, and accept some people where they are and move aside. I have some friends, I think I mentioned it earlier, who really have come back to me now. I'm trying to figure out if I can tell this story without revealing too much. One friend, I went to college with someone who was the 5th person hired at Google. So he's doing very well. And sadly, I'm not one of his 5 friends from school that is also worth a couple $100 million. That's another story. But one of the guys who is in that realm, he and I debated from freshman year on. And he now lives in Colorado, and he had a moment where he said, you know, something you said to me in college, I'm understanding now because my kids are in this school, and I'm seeing they're not talking to anyone who looks different from them. And I'm thinking that's a problem. And I'm hearing them making assumptions and conclusions. And so what he did is he funded and sponsored the project to come out to Colorado and spend a day at his son's school. You know, this is the same guy who was like, no, affirmative action is wrong and bad, and all this stuff you're saying is incorrect, and blah, blah, blah. Here he was, years later, being, oh, when it got personal, and he saw his kids going a different direction, he's like, I need to do something. And he stepped up. And so we don't agree 100% on everything, but it was a real nice moment to think that planting a seed in him years ago helped him move in a different direction. So it takes a lot of patience, and it's a lot of work, and a lot of internal reflection. But I really do believe that if you stick with it and then make decisions about who to stay with and not stay with, because some folks just are going to be who they are, and that's okay. That's what makes the world an exciting, beautiful place. But I do believe in doing the best one can to encourage people to verbalize that internal dialogue, as I said earlier, and having some patience, and then also having abilities to know when it's time to stop and move forward. And sometimes you just got to say a prayer for somebody and move on. You know, like I really believe in that, honestly and deeply. Just like, okay, got you, and then moving on. How's that? Great.
First and foremost, I wanted to thank you for this film. I'm a big believer of sharing stories and that they can inspire someone. But something that stuck out to me was your relationship with your sister and your family. And I wanted to know, why did you feel like you needed to get away from your family while you was progressing? And what made you decide to come back and look for answers after everything?
That's a great question. Thank you. Part of the reason for making this film was trying to keep folks from going down the path that I went down. You know, in many ways, it's a tragedy, the film. I'm telling a sad story in lots of ways. I was able to have some positive experience with my family, but in the shorter film, there's a scene where my mother's getting her hair done in the living room, and my sister's husband is doing her hair, and it's like back in the Jerry curl days, you know, and they filmed it, and I put it in the film on purpose, and it's really a funny little scene. Now, when I was in high school, I went to my high school, and I saw all these wealthy people. And my high school was full of some very wealthy people. There was a woman who was a class below me, and her grandfather invented the paper bag. Like, that's money. That's old, long money. And she and I actually are still friends to this day, not for the paper bag money, but because I like her. And I went into the school, and I looked around, and I thought, wow, these people have double parents, and they have cars and money. We must be wrong. We've done something wrong. What are they doing that they did right and we did wrong? And I had that notion and that feeling. And I reacted out in a way and turned my back on them and basically did a divorce from them, thinking like, if I be more like these people, I'll be successful and right, you know? And I'm lucky enough to have had the experience to be like, that was a total mistake, and these are my people, and I have to come back home. And I was luckily embraced and welcomed and forgiven. I mean, that's what family does. And build a really strong connection. You know, it was really intense when my mother got very ill, and she said to me, I didn't know you loved me so much. And I was reeling because I was like, well, how did you not know that? And I thought, well, yeah, because I was kind of a not a great kid at the time when I went to this high school and thought, to be successful, I need to be like them and not like these people I come from. That was such a mistake. You know, I come from a rich, incredible, intense people, you know, that are beautiful and great. I know that now. What I didn't have in high school was someone to say, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing? You know, I was just on my own. I think there are a lot of people at the school who were nervous about talking to me about it. My family didn't understand because I was going separate. And it's also part of my personality, who I am. I know I did a lot of it and pushed people away. So that was the reason. There was a lot of shame attached to where I came from, this lower income family that I thought I didn't understand. As an adult and with my work, I understand more what systemic racism is about and what economic divide in this country is about historically. And the fact that we are still here is kind of incredible in the face of what my family went through. And so I celebrate that and think about it as beautiful. And it's interesting that you asked a question about Mr. Du Bois, because that discussion, that history is as old as this country in terms of what does it mean to try and survive and exist in society that is not designed for your success. That's not historically set up for you for me as a person of color to succeed. And what does it mean to actually succeed within that? Like, that's a major accomplishment. And I couldn't have done it without my family and the support. Even though I was being kind of a dorky, obnoxious little kid, they still were feeding me and taking care of me and providing me with the energy and the love and the strength that I needed to go through every day. So that was the connection. Like, that's a real honest answer. It was just shame and disconnection that I perpetuated and created. It's been powerful to take this film around and have people go, uh-oh, I think I'm doing what you did. And I'm like, yeah, well, turn it around right now and get back to it. Like, it's a blessing to have a story that can do that. And I was at a school in Denver, Colorado, and a Quaker gentleman said, you realize you have a ministry, right? And I was like, I ain't got no ministry. What are you talking about, you know? And as I listened and thought, I was like, yeah, you know, sometimes that ministry, you don't ask for it, and it just comes to you. You just have to, you know, quote Patty LaBelle, don't block the blessing and let it come through and move with it. So that is, I mean, that's the gift that I have with doing this work. And the reconnecting was something I had to do and was necessary. And it was another reason I think that I'm still standing here today and moving forward. So thank you for that question, because it's a deep and important one that it's nice to remember that that's what this film is trying to communicate and get out there. Thanks. Do we have time? Okay.
So this is a refrain that I've heard dozens of times from, you know, mostly students of color here and out in Providence. And one of the students in the film says it, that he feels like he has to work twice as hard as, I assume, his white peers. I heard a student of color on our campus say that last night at an event, and I read essentially the same thing in that Ta-Nehisi Coates article we read, that President Obama had to work twice as hard to get where he's at, and the current president had to work half as hard to get further. So that it's a refrain we always hear, but I'm struck by how often I've heard it in the last 24 hours. So I'm wondering if you have ideas or insights how we, as, you know, the people in this room and PC and our society as a whole, can both support those students or those people in general, but also change the culture or change the system so that that's not a refrain we hear all the time.
I think, you know, with that question, I'll say a few things. I think that for one, when you think about the intention behind that question, some of the answers will come. That's always my first answer in those moments. When you think about the intention behind that question, because you obviously have a reason you're asking it and you're in it and it's going on. I think that's a real great place to start. And then I'll say this, and I hope it doesn't feel too attacky, you know, but I'll say this, that because in general, to fix this problem, and this is something I'll say this, and I hope kids of color in the room hear this. When you that twice as hard thing is real and it's true, when that notion comes to your mind, also remember, and you are great and wonderful. I think I grew up hearing the message, you gotta work twice as hard, and it wasn't followed with, and you're wonderful. It's just kind of like twice as hard, oh, what do I do? And that's a heavy weight for anyone to take on. So I believe in really stressing that notion that twice as hard, and you are incredible and great. And then, this is the part that in terms of the way you describe the people, and I think this is a solution towards that in terms of how to respond to it. And it's just picking up on a moment, and this is your first draft. I want you to feel to attack, but I think it's important to say, you said those people, and it needs to be our people. This is a campus where we're all here together, and as long as we see folks in a separate plane or existence, that's when we miss the opportunity. It makes sense because it's separate and it's different, and that's how we've been designed to think and work. But when we can start thinking, okay, our kids are having a hard time. I don't think you're thinking that. I want you to know, be clear of that. Our kids are having a hard time. What can we do about our kids? As long as people in the institution think, wow, those kids are having a hard time, what do we do? That's an illustration of the disconnection that stresses and shows why kids feel they have to work twice as hard. You know, when a problem happens, like, oh, that black problem, that Muslim problem, that Latino problem, that whatever problem happened, versus our campus had a problem together, what can we do about it? Because I guarantee you when something, not guarantee you, but I feel very comfortable when something happens to a white male, it's not thought, oh, wow, the white males have an issue on campus. It's, oh, something happened to a student. You know, does that make sense? Yeah. No, it's fine. It's just you gave us a great moment to touch into, so thank you for that. Yeah, because I think that, because that's said because sadly it's the truth. It is twice as hard. I made a film called The Prep School Negro, you know, and when I went out into the universe to get it, people were like, good luck with that movie. You know, they weren't jumping onto the idea because it seemed so scary and frightening. And I think when people sit down and watch it, they have what was pointed out, that this is just a human story. And this is a question we're asking, how can we all be better people and have good connections with each other? So I think that the twice as hard notion, I hear it because sadly it's true in our society. And we all should be thinking, what can I do to make sure students don't feel or have the experience of having to work twice as hard? Maybe I can't fix it in the whole world, but I can here on this campus, in this classroom, at this dinner table, in this one-on-one intimate conversation and moment, I can make a difference right there. And I think that is and I'm very optimistic and dream big and hope that it can happen. But I do believe that that is the beginning of fixing some of these problems, you know. I also acknowledge and accept the twice as hard situation and think, okay, I got to deal with it, and think how I can strategize and take care of myself within that space, because it can be soul-crushing sometimes when you're sitting here and be like, I'm the best person for this, but you get passed over, you don't get acknowledged, or people can't see you, or you're invisible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the things that happen to you, just people don't know that they're upsetting you or offending you or hurting you. It's just Tuesday. And they may not, that doesn't mean someone is evil or obnoxious or terrible or racist or bad or horrible. It's just that systems are in place in our American society, our global society, that exclude some people from participating fully. And I'll finish out here and say this, that I sometimes meet people who say, well, I'm one person, I can't do anything about that. That's a huge systemic, huge problem. And I'm like, I don't agree. Get your little ice pick out and chip away at that iceberg that is something that we built, you know, that is a design, and tear it down and take it apart and rebuild and make it, because this whole message about we can make the world a better place, like I really just believe in that. I think that is the message behind this whole film project and all this conversation. So on that note, I'll say once again, thank you so much for having me out here and spending the time. We got some snacks outside, and I'll see you later.